Well, good morning to everyone here and everyone online. Let me just continue in spirit of prayer for one more thing as we ask God's help. Lord, as we look into your word, I pray that you would work within us. Show us yourself and ourselves and what it is that you want to happen. We just offer this time to you and ask that your word in the hands of your spirit would make a transforming difference in our lives. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to start this morning with a little audience participation. By a show of hands, how many of you, so this should be audience participation, even if you're shy, be ready to raise your hand if this describes you. How many of you have not slept since Tuesday night? And by that I mean haven't slept at all, not haven't had good sleep, but no sleep at all. How many? Nobody? All right. How many of you have not slept since Friday night? Still nobody. Okay. Since Saturday? Come on, people, it's Sunday, and you mean that you have already been asleep? We're not even like halfway into the day and you've already spent time sleeping? How are we ever going to get anything done? Have you ever heard of a work ethic? I mean, really. I want to talk about work ethic this morning, and a little tongue-in-cheek there, obviously, but it's interesting how we look at work ethic. I want to talk about work ethic because it's a very important part of our lives as followers of Jesus, that we would have a good work ethic. It is also important that we would have a good rest ethic, and we're going to look at both of those things. And my hope and my prayer is that the Spirit of God would work in our hearts to help us have a better work ethic and a better rest ethic by the time we're done. So if you have your Bibles, open to Mark chapter 6, and we're going to read a passage that actually continues from where we were last week. Last week we had, which has been described as a sandwich, right? Mark likes to sandwich material together, so he sends out the 12 on a mission to do basically what he's been doing, to preach, to teach, to heal, to do the miraculous, to cast out demons, to express the kingdom of God through his work in their lives, through their lives. And so they do that, they come back and they report on that, and Mark splits that story and inserts another one that at first glance seems like it doesn't quite fit, but when we look at it carefully, we realize, oh no, it's exactly part of the same package. There's a reason he split it that way. And the story in the middle is a story of John the Baptist and actually how he dies. And the package is about what it looks like to follow Jesus, particularly on mission, and that following Jesus does have a cost sometimes, and John is the extreme example of that, but there's a cost that needs to be paid. This is actually continuing that same basic flow. Now, this is going to be the feeding of the 5,000, one of the best-known miracle stories. All four of the Gospels tell this story, each Gospel writer in a way that matches what he wants us to focus on as he's writing. But it's a deeply impacting moment, and we will see Jesus as the center as always, and we see continuing to reveal himself as the Messiah, as the King, as the one who has authority and power, as the one who has come to make a change and to make a difference. We're going to see the power of God and the passion of God dramatically displayed in Jesus as he does this miracle and shows that he has power over the created order. And the miracle is motivated by his heart of compassion and his love for people. So the power and passion of God in Jesus is going to be revealed. But as we look at this story, as Mark tells us, Mark wants us to continue to keep a major focus on the disciples. And what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does discipleship look like? Because as the story unfolds, it starts with the disciples. It starts with Jesus focusing on the disciples. There's a seeming interruption, but as it comes back around, he's going to end by urging the disciples to do certain things. So it's very much a story that even as we see these things about Jesus, it shows us things about ourselves, about how we should live. And what it shows is a rhythm of life a rhythm of life that involves both a work ethic and a rest ethic that these disciples are discipled into. Jesus leads them into that. Now, they are on mission with God, right? They are sharing Christ. They are preaching sermons. They are healing. They're doing all these kind of religious stuff. And it's easy when we approach passages like that for most of us. Now, I can relate to that because I'm preaching a sermon right now, so I get the preaching sermon part, right? But for most of us in the room, we're not going to be doing that. And so it's easy when we read some of these passages to kind of disconnect and kind of say, well, that's kind of the religious life thing, and I'm living a normal life, and my faith and my walk with Jesus is important, but I never have been able to figure out how those quite reconcile, so most of my life is spent over in this other zone. And I just want to remind you that every one of us has 168 hours a week to live. And those 168 hours a week, regardless of what your paycheck comes from, if you even get a paycheck, are to be lived for Christ, as a disciple of Christ, on mission with him. Right? The fundamental details may shift around a little bit based on the assignment God has particularly given you. So for me, I can look at the preaching part and immediately relate to that. And you may go, I'm running accounting tallies, or I'm doing artwork, or I'm teaching children. And there may be some transposition that needs to take place, but the reality is if you're living your life the way you should, and I'm living my life the way that I should, 168 hours a week of it is my discipleship and is on mission with God in the world. And it's important to remember that the way God designed us, I'm kind of a latecomer to the game. Adam was more concerned about pasturing animals than about pastoring people, right? And as God gave the original mandate to humans, which was actually never withdrawn, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, rule it, subdue it, engineering was more in view than evangelism. And he would expect you to be a mom, not necessarily to be a missionary. So the things that we tend to immediately gravitate towards actually came late because sin and the way the world is broken and how God is working in the world. Every human endeavor that is done for God's glory and for ultimate good is part of his plan. Now, in a broken and fallen world, all of us, whether we draw a paycheck from spiritual stuff or not, all of us need to have a, if you will, a magnetic compass needle that is always going to move towards redemption, move towards sharing Christ, move towards the gospel. But the world in which that plays out is going to vary from person to person. So while these guys would be technically missionaries, and we see their rhythm, I think the rhythm applies to all of us. Maybe there's a little transposition that needs to take place, but the rhythm that God's expecting of them, that he's discipling them in, is the same rhythm he wants from us. And it's going to come down to these two questions. The question that we need to be asking ourselves and letting the Spirit search us on, what is my work ethic like? Do I have the work ethic that Jesus would want? What is my rest ethic like? Do I have the rest ethic that Jesus would want? And what's the rhythm that goes with those? So if you want to follow along, we'll pick up the flow. In verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when they went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place. The hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread? Give it to them to eat? And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Now, 5,000 men, and there's also women and children. The other gospel writers tell us that. Mark is staying focused. But the reality is Jesus has just again displayed his power. He's taken a lunch sack and fed more than 5,000 people just by his miraculous ability to multiply the fish and to multiply the bread. He's shown that he is Lord over the created order. And he has also shown that he is the true shepherd of Israel, because when he gets off the boat, he sees them, he's moved with compassion, right? His heart breaks for them. There's this passion of God that shows through. And it's not just, hey, there's people here who need something. There's people here who have expectations, because he's been surrounded by that all along. And in fact, they just left a bunch of people who have expectations and who are clamoring, because that's why they had to leave. He tells the disciples, look, we're never going to get any peace here because there's people everywhere. There's people all around us. People are always looking for stuff. We can't even have a meal together, so let's go to the other side and get some peace. But when he shows up there, there's a crowd. And in this moment, he responds from his heart, because he sees them as those who are sheep without a shepherd. That's part of his heart as the true Messiah of Israel. The leaders who've been put in place by God are not leading, at least not in the way they're supposed to. They're supposed to be leading people to God. They're supposed to be preparing people for God. And he gets off the boat and he sees all these people who have nobody to point them to God. The leaders are actually getting in the way of God. And he's moved and he starts to meet their true need by teaching them. And then their physical need comes up, and that's where the rest of the miracle comes from. So we see Jesus doing the same kinds of things he's been doing. But along the way, in this particular part of the journey, we're supposed to give extra attention to the disciples and what it is that Jesus is calling them to and how he's working in their lives. And in this passage, Jesus is discipling them in their work ethic and their rest ethic, right? So in the opening 3 verses, let's just read those again. And let's look at this idea of a rest ethic. The apostles return to Jesus, verse 30, and they tell them all that they've done and all that they've taught. They've just had this amazing ministry season. People are trusting God. They're believing. They're repenting. People are being healed. Demons are being cast out. People who couldn't walk can walk. People who've had lifelong diseases are healed of those diseases. Amazing things are happening. It's so amazing. They come back very excited, and people are clamoring all around them. Right? Great stuff's been happening. And he says to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Right? There's still this excitement. There's still this opportunity. It's really important to catch this. There was more opportunity for impact to be made. There are people who are coming who are looking for stuff. And here's the disciples who've been teaching, who've been doing miracles. They've been sent out by God to do significant things. And there's more significant stuff right there. And he says, we got to pull away. We got to step away from this and rest. In fact, we're going to have to do some hard things to create the space for rest. We're going to get into a boat and we're going to go to a desolate place. It's a very desolate place, apparently, because 3 times it describes it as desolate. It does in verse 31, and then in verse 32, and then down in verse 35, specifically calls it a desolate place. And there may be some things that Mark is alluding to there that's debated. We're not going to get into that. That doesn't actually matter. The main focus is they're getting away from all the busyness and the hustle and bustle to be alone with Jesus to rest, even though there's more work to be done, even though there's more impact to be had, even though there's more opportunity to be taken advantage of. He says, we're going to stop that and we're going to get away. That's really powerful. He's building in them a rest ethic. There's never going to be a lack of need. If I take seriously my life with Jesus, and I want to be the person who is loving and serving, there will never be a lack of need. There will never be a lack of opportunity. There will always be one more thing to be done, one more person to be met with, one more person to be counseled, one more opportunity to share, one more way to give, one more way to serve. There's always going to be that. In a world that is broken and sinful, it is literally true that for all intents and purposes, the need is infinite. And against that backdrop, Jesus says, you guys need to get away. We need some space. There's a rest ethic, right? A work ethic. I looked up a definition of work ethic, which there's Webster's definition, if you think they're any good at dictionaries. It says, a belief in work as a moral good. Good, that's a good thing. A set of values centered on the importance of doing work and reflected especially in a desire or determination to work hard. I think that's a good definition. I'm sure Webster's is heaving a sigh of relief that I agree with him. And I think that's something that is on target. It is virtuous. Hard work is a virtue. Hard work is a good thing. The problem is overwork. And we're going to get into that as we look at this. It's not hard work. We're designed to work hard. We're designed sometimes to work to the point of exhaustion. The disciples have just done that. Jesus does that repeatedly. That's not the problem. The problem is, do I have, coupled with my work ethic, a rest ethic, where I look at rest as a moral good, where I look at rest as something to desire and a determination to build into my life. Jesus says, you guys need some rest. There's more opportunity, and there's going to be more, and there's going to be more. Stop. Step away from the opportunity. Get some space. You need to be refreshed. You need to be restored. You were designed that way. I was designed that way by God. Think about the way God set up the universe. Right? He set us up with a rhythm, a Sabbath rhythm, where he worked and then he rested and he passed it on to us. And it's shown up in different ways at different times in human history, but the rhythm is still there. There needs to be a pattern of rest, or maybe more immediate, that whether you like it or not, you can't get away from. Here's why I started where I started, right? Everybody has slept since Tuesday night. Almost all of us, probably all of us, started off this day in bed, asleep. We got up partway through the day, and that happens every single day. Now, your patterns may vary, but on the whole, God has designed it so that you and I will spend 1/3, more or less, of our lives asleep. Why? What's that all about? And to say, well, it's an opportunity for us to be refreshed and restored is actually inadequate. It's true, but it's inadequate. Because when God created us, he didn't go into the den of his home in heaven and pull a book off the shelf that says, how to make a human. Oh, here's how it's done. Oh, I guess they need to have this 2/3, 1/3 cycle built into them. Okay, that's part of the recipe. There's no rules. God is sovereign. He designed us exactly as he wanted. He could have made us, we didn't need restoration. He built that into us. He built into us a weakness on purpose. He built into us a need on purpose. That's something that we have a hard time sometimes coming to grips with. And that's part of a foundation of a rest ethic. Do you know when I kick against the weaknesses God has given me? Now, sometimes, I'll pause that sentence for just a second so it's clear. Sometimes it is appropriate. Push hard, achieve, grow. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, where's the stopping point? Is there a line there? I may not always know where the line is, but is there a line there? Is there ever a point that I have to say, I am weak and I can't do this, and I'm not even going to try because that would be idolatry? Our constant take it up a notch, take it up a notch, take it up a notch, take it up a notch can be rooted in a desire for excellence, but it is often rooted in idolatry of heart. God made me where I don't have a choice. For roughly a third of my life, I actually have to release control of the universe into his hands and say, you're going to have to run this without me. I'm signing off right now. And that's not just me, that's everybody. You could be a Navy SEAL, toughest people on the planet. You will still have to sleep before Thursday. You might make it to Wednesday, and you might have strategies because you're really tough, and I respect that, and I'm grateful that you're able to do what you're able to do, but you will not make it to Thursday. You certainly won't make it to Friday. However tough you are still weak. You are still frail. You are still dependent, as am I. And as we follow Jesus, we follow him into a partnership in the world that is so desperately needy. And there's so many things that he's put in our hearts to do, so many dreams that we have, so much good stuff to be about. I have to have a solid rest ethic that says I can't do it all, I'm not supposed to, and even to try would be sin. God actually wants me to stop, to create some space. Now, it's not just so that I can be with him. That would be a misunderstanding. It would be accurate to say so that I can be with him in a different way. But God wants to be in all 168 hours. And as Jesus is discipling the 12 here, he's with them during the work and he's with them during the rest, right? So I'm supposed to be with Jesus in all of it. But there's a different texture, there's a different character, what with him can look like when there's some space. When it's not the next thing coming and the next thing coming and the next thing coming. So he tells his disciples, we're getting away. Yes, there's people here. Yes, there's needs here. Yes, there's all kinds of stuff happening. But you need to have a rest ethic. Let's do something hard, but let's make it happen. Let's plan for desolate place, you and me, and let's go find that. So bringing that up to us today, the contours may look different, but the rhythm's still the same. Do I have a good rest ethic? Do I plan for, do I work for, do I guard, do I fight for space sometimes to rest? And when I do that, is that important, or do I sometimes we feel guilty. I'm not doing something. I should be doing something. I've got a bad rest ethic if that's the case, right? It is possible to be lazy, and maybe some of us actually have that issue. That's no excuse. But a healthy, vibrant relationship with God includes a space for rest, to realize, the King of the universe isn't hoping I'll put in a little overtime this week so that the universe doesn't come crashing down. He's just not. If you thought he was, just back away from that. That's crazy. He's not waiting for you to put in overtime so that he can run his universe. There's space to be pursued, to be fought for, to be experienced. That's what he's calling them to. If I don't do that because of how God has wired me, it may happen anyway. I don't know whether he was overworking or just working hard. It's difficult to say from the outside, but one of my heroes is Charles Spurgeon, who was a pastor, died about 130 years ago, most influential pastor of his era, perhaps the most influential pastor of any era. He's still very influential today. And he did many ministry things that everyone goes, whoa, that was amazing. One of them is he spoke to what was probably the largest audience for an indoor audience ever spoken to by that point in time. It was a little over 23,000 people with no amplification. It was just his lungs and the gospel. Crazy. Well, ministry's hard, preaching's hard, it wears us out. But doing that is just insane. He did that on Wednesday night, he went home and he went to bed and he woke up on Friday morning. Somebody just pulled Thursday right out of his calendar. He slept straight through. It was that arduous, right? And he was tough, man. He would do all kinds of stuff, but there's no way. You have to rest, right? Sometimes we push ourselves until we break. Another young pastor who died young because of a sickness that he got, but he blamed it substantially on his overworking himself, was Robert Murray McShane. And as he lay dying, he spoke mournfully to a friend. He said, God has given me a message to share and a horse to ride. Alas, I have killed the horse, and I cannot share the message. And he was talking about his physical body that broke, right? I can't be perfect. I can't be Iron Man. I can't be Superman. I can't do everything. I know that, and yet how often do I try to live that anyway? And instead, what Jesus is calling me to is to have a proper view that says a rhythm of rest is actually part of the deal. Even leaving opportunity, even leaving impact, even leaving amazing things that could happen. That's part of the package. Guys, I know everyone's getting around here, but we can't even eat a meal. It is not time for us to preach one more sermon. It's time to get in the boat. It's time to cross the lake. It's time to find a place that is alone and quiet and desolate for us to be together. What's my rest ethic like? And when I say rest, I mean rest. Rest can have a lot of components to it, but at the end of the day, rest is short for restoration. It should be restorative. It should be regenerative. It should do something other than simply unplug me. Unplugging me matters, right? But it's not the only thing. So when I'm looking at rest, am I also looking at a screen? Sometimes that's okay, but if that's my default, I'm probably in trouble. And if that's my only plan, I'm definitely in trouble, right? There's sometimes my brain turns to oatmeal, right? It's just like, I can't think anymore. And it is refreshing to just sit down and stream something and watch stuff blow up. It's like, yeah, okay, right? But if that's all I ever do to rest, something's really wrong. That is not going to build my life in Jesus. He's calling them to rest with him. There's a place for that. There's a place for streaming the media. But that's a very limited place. There's also a place for something as crazy as a nap, or something as crazy as reading, or hiking, or doing something that's life-giving, not just pressure relieving. They didn't have those complications, but I'm sure they still had the same issues. Do I have a rest ethic that will allow me to be restored and refreshed, that will also allow me to connect with God more easily and more fully in ways that I wouldn't normally be able to? He calls them away from some pretty amazing opportunities because they needed rest. Now, if you're an extrovert and you're an introvert, you'll hear this differently, right? An introvert, you're like, yes, finally, somebody is giving me permission to tell the rest of the world to go away and just leave me alone. And yes, God gives you permission. ... Hold on, there's more sermon coming. For an extrovert, you're like, okay, I don't know. That'd be kind of boring. Well, what's required of rest for someone who's just truly an extrovert, someone who's truly an introvert, is probably going to be a little bit different. But for all of us, the foundations are the same. How am I being restored? How am I creating space? How am I quieting my soul? How am I allowing God to speak in? How am I enjoying? How am I doing things that are life-giving? Life-giving will probably look different for an extrovert and an introvert often. That's great. That's all part of the package, but it's a package of things. A good rest ethic is saying, I was designed to rest as part of my function. And in that, glorify God, trust him, and encounter him in the quiet. How do I do that? That's a discernment process, and probably it varies from person to person in some of the details. Now, let's talk about the work ethic, because that's the rest of the passage, right? He says, okay, let's go away. They go away to this desolate place. And as soon as they get ashore, verse 34, he sees a great crowd and he has compassion because they're sheep without a shepherd. He begins to teach them. The day grows long. The disciples grow concerned. They say, we need to get these people some food, send them away so they can eat. You feed them. How do we do that? Should we go buy some stuff? No, what do you got? Well, we got this little lunch bag. Great, we'll use that. Everyone sit down, start passing it out. Right now, Jesus is doing some pretty miraculous things, but don't lose sight of the fact that the disciples are totally interwoven in here. He has everyone sit down in groups of 50 and 100. It's like table for 50 over here, table for 100 over here. Picture this giant restaurant where they're about to feed everyone, and there's 12 servers for more than 5,000 people. Have you ever been in a restaurant when it's really busy and watched the servers? If they're any good. Now, bad servers not, but good servers are moving the whole time. There's no such thing as rest for them. They are working like crazy. They are not only working with their hands, they're working with their minds. They're attentive to what people need, and they're watching for those things, and they're moving those things. Right, the disciples, there's 12 guys who are about to feed parties of 50 and 100 scattered all over the place, 5,000 plus. That's just the guys. They're moving. They're working. Right? Jesus is breaking the bread and the fish and multiplying it, and they're passing it out. And they come back and get more, and they pass it out. And they come back and get more, and they pass it out. No sooner is that all done than Jesus says, okay, time to pick it up. And everyone picks up a basket, and they go through, and they pick up more stuff than they started with. They got off the boat thinking they were going to rest, and immediately they're thrown into incredibly intense work. How does that fit? How do we reconcile those two things? Well, I think we need to hold them in tension. And I think what we need to understand is you and I need to plan for rest. We need to have that rest ethic. But our plan for rest needs to take into account the rest of the world. I don't live in a bubble where I just have control. Any of you that have small children or have raised small children, let me ask you a hypothetical question. Hypothetically, you have a plan that you're going to do something, and it's going to look this way on this day, and everything's going to proceed as follows, and you got it all laid out in your mind. Have you ever, in those moments, hypothetically, see that plan just blow up because of those little people running around who share your last name and eat out of your refrigerator? Right? Do you ever get to do anything according to the ideal plan? Of course not. That's not the way things work in the real world. You and I are stitched into relationship all around us. I plan my life, and I plan my life for rest as part of that, but I have to take into account the rest of the world that isn't on board with my plan. Right? That's what happens. They get off the boat for the purpose of rest, and everybody's there. Now what? I love the fact that God, in His Word, leaves us messy stuff because then it matches the life that I actually experience. I love the fact that there's the book of Job that's confusing and difficult if you really understand it. It's like, really? I don't like this. I love the fact that there's not just a book of Proverbs, which everyone's like, do this, and this, then this happens. And then we struggle because it's proverbial, so it do this, and this is most likely to happen, but there's plenty of exceptions. We don't like to read it that way, but that's the way we should read it. But there's also the book of Ecclesiastes that says, a lot of this stuff, I don't know, it's kind of confusing. I tried this, I tried that. Well, it was kind of empty. But here's what I do know, just trust God and keep going. Really? That's it? Well, I mean, there's maybe more to that. But it's like, I love the fact that there's books like that because that's the world I live in. I love the fact that when they got off the boat to get rest, they didn't get rest because that's the world we live in. I have to make my plans with the rest of the world in mind. So that's where the work ethic comes in. And they go into work mode. Now, here's where it's important to read this carefully, because this actually gives us so much help. Just making the observations we've made so far may actually complicate life. It's like I'm supposed to get rest, but when the need comes up, I'm supposed to meet the need, and I never run out of needs. It is a world of literally infinite need for all intents and purposes, so I will never get rest. Not so. Not so. My work ethic needs to have three components to it, not just one. The component that's highlighted by Webster's is the hard work, the amount of hard work that I put in. I need that. I was actually made to work. That's fundamentally stitched into what it is to be human. We were created to know God and to work in his world on his behalf, in partnership with him. So work is fundamental. But there's more to a work ethic than just saying I'm going to do a lot of good work. The work ethic that God is calling me for, the work ethic that will help me as a disciple, adds at least two other components that show up here. One is not just how much hard work I do, but why. Why do I do the hard work? And then the other component is, what's my resource for doing the work? And that's what will allow me to at least begin to frame the questions to navigate when is it time to rest and when is it time to work. A messy world, I may not always know for sure, but often just being able to frame the question right can help me discern what God is saying. So part of the question, here's a need, is why do I want to respond to that? What's driving my response? Is my response driven by the heart of God? Jesus, by definition, has the heart of God, and he responds. But notice, he left people with needs who wanted stuff. That is a necessary implication of what's gone on before. To get away. And now he gets away, and there's people with needs, and now he responds. Why? They just wear him down? I think what's embedded here, and I think we've already actually seen this in the Gospel of Mark when he leaves Capernaum, when there's fruitful ministry opening up there, and he says, yeah, but that's not what I'm actually here for. I'm here for these other things too, is he's being discerning. And when he gets off the boat, he doesn't just see people who are interested in him, who are kind of hungry or maybe need to be healed or, whatever. He sees them through God's lens. These are sheep without a shepherd, and I am the shepherd who has come. I will meet these needs right now. Right? I'm driven by God's agenda. Now, why do I think that's helpful? As I've thought about this, here's what I think I see in my life, and here's what I think I see in your lives over and over again. I'm afraid that a lot of what we do is actually driven by our ego needs. We want to be the one who does it. We want to be the one who's heroic. We want to be that guy. We want to think well about ourselves. We want to achieve. There's all these different reasons. And some of those reasons actually have a measure of validity to them. But disconnected from the heart of God, they become just one more form of idolatry. Right? So why do I do what I do? Because I want to get ahead. I want to succeed. I want to live this kind of life. I want to make this kind of impression. Right? And you can flip it over. You can flip it over to something that's less obvious and sounds more noble, but it's not. I do it because I want to meet people's expectations. Why? Because their expectations align with God? No, because I don't want them to think poorly of me. No, because I want to feel good about myself. No, because I don't want to have conflict. Right? How much of your choices, how much of my choices are actually driven by things like that? And how much of it is anchored deeper into this is what the heart of God is, the best I can discern, and that's where I'm going to meet this need. Does the heart of God incorporate expectations? Sure. Does it incorporate dreams that I may have? Sure. It's not an either or. It's a center of gravity question. And the center of gravity is, what is God doing? What is God calling me to? What's his purpose in this? Can I say no to somebody with a crying need? If I'm following Jesus, the answer has to be yes. The answer has to be yes. Unless I'm convinced that their need is actually the call of God in my life, I'm supposed to follow God, not everyone else. If I'm following Jesus, can I let go of something dear to me that I wanted in order to do this thing that I really don't want to do? The answer has to be yes. The answer has to be yes if I'm following him. Otherwise, I'm God. Now, for me, and I know for you too, it's a mixed bag. We're still marbled through with our human frailty, with our human foolishness, and with our human sin. And thank God he's able to work with people like you and me. But the foundational issue is not marbled, it's clear. I'm trying to follow him. And the thing that says it's time to work is this lines up with the heart of God. And then I let go of whatever, including if I feel like I'm about to break. Because the God who's got the heart for me to do whatever it is he's calling me to do is the one who designed me with the limit. And he's got a heart for me too. Remember, it's not just compassion for the people on the other side of the shore that drives this story, it's compassion for the apostles that starts it. He's compassionate for all of us. But sometimes he will press me. And part of helping to discern, it's not going to be cut and dried. It's a discernment process. But part of helping to discern is not just having a good work ethic where I work hard, but having a good work ethic where the reason I work hard is because I'm trying to line up with the heart of God. I keep coming back to that question. And then the other thing is the resource that I have in the work. Jesus is doing the miracle here, right? And he turns to them, he says, you feed them. And they say, what do? Buy a bunch of bread? Now, you could read that cynically. I think it's a legit question. Oh, okay, what are we supposed to do? Do we go buy a bunch of bread? He's like, no. I'll work with what you've got, which may sound crazy, but remember what he's just done. Remember where they've just come from. He has just sent them on mission that they were under-resourced for by his design. He says, go from village to village. You can take your walking stick. Be sure you're wearing shoes. That's it. Everything else, you're just going to have to trust me for because I'm the actual resource you need. You're under-resourced. I get it. And I'm going to show up anyway. So now he's just taking it to a new level. You're under-resourced. How are you going to feed all these people? Well, what do you got? Right? And if I'm going to have a work ethic like Jesus designed, I need to have a lunch sack mentality that says, I got this. Do you want this? It may not be much, but it's yours. And if you want to do something with it, here you go. God will often leverage those things if I'll give them to him, right? So the work ethic he's calling me to is not just, hey, work hard because there's needs. It's there's a time and a place that this lines up with the heart of God. Do that, even if it costs. But do it in my power. Do it in my strength. You can't go out and do it on your own. You got to work with me. You got to let me work through you and then watch what I'll do. And I think sometimes if we'll give him our little lunch bag, we just might find ourselves picking up 12 baskets full of overflowing blessing. It's like, wow, that was cool. Yeah. All right, so this rhythm he's got for them is a rhythm of working together, and it's a rhythm that says there's a time to rest. You don't do everything. You can't do everything. I'm not asking you to do everything. That would be wrong. You need to get away even from opportunities and needs and just rest. Thank you. There was an opportunity to do some service. Thank you. And it's also a rhythm that says, but I am willing to work. I am interruptible. Because I am not perfect, I don't know everything, and I don't get it right, I'd better be interruptible. Because I'm constantly, as hard as I'm working, as much as I try, as sincere as I am, and as much as I've grown, I'm never perfectly aligned with God. And so as we're going forward, he's going to constantly be giving correctives. He's going to be adjusting course. And those are going to be intrusions in my life. Those are going to be interruptions. I have to be interruptible. And sometimes those interruptions are going to move me away from the rest I thought I was going to have into further work. Sometimes those interruptions are going to be away from the opportunities that are laying right in front of me that I want to take advantage of into a place of rest. And in order to work the rhythm that he's got for me, I need to have a good work ethic and I need to have a good rest ethic. And then I need to do that with him. So, for today, questions. Let me give you 3 questions to process. The first question is, am I interruptible? Am I interruptible? Second question is, what's in my lunch sack? Am I willing to give that to him? Those are both related to the work ethic side. Actually, the interruptible is related to both. Like, is it okay for God to shift things around? Am I, the best I can, trying to get on board with him quickly? It'll come as an intrusion sometimes. It's not like I go, oh, that's great. It's like, oh, wait, hold on. I have to figure it out. And I have to discern, is God really in this? I'm in a broken world. Sometimes stuff is just hard, and I need to persevere and press through. That's virtuous at the right time. It's idolatrous at the wrong time. So am I interruptible? Am I willing to give him whatever's in my sack and say, here you go. Here's my 5 loaves. Here's my 2 fish. What do you want to do? How are you going to resource me? Now, he resources us providentially. So it's not ignore the details of life, right? Providential circumstance and provision are fundamental ways that God guides us, but they're not the only ways. And so there's this willingness to say, I'll use what you've given me, and if it seems like you're causing me to stretch way beyond what I would expect, well, if I'm sure you're in it, I'm going. And then the last thing, kind of where we started, and I suspect for a lot of us, this is really the question this morning, do I have a good rest ethic? I wonder how many of us this morning, Jesus is actually inviting to step away from something for a moment and create the space to be with him in a different kind of way and to be restored. You're not God. And the universe will not come crashing down if you back up, nor with me. Sometimes, actually, that's what God's calling us to. I don't know which area God's prompting you in, or maybe something different. But my encouragement, my exhortation is that you'd listen and that you'd respond. Say, all right, Lord, this week, here's what I think you want me to do, so that's what I'm going to try to do, or not do. I ask the ushers to come. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy. Thank you that you are expert at working with frail, confused, foolish, stubborn, and sometimes downright sinful people like me. Thank you that you will empower and guide, and that you will guard. Help us each to just follow you this morning into what you're calling us to. I pray that we would all be defined by both a good work ethic and a good rest ethic, and a dynamic rhythm of life centered around you. Lord, as we give these gifts, I pray that you would use them for your purposes, for your glory, and for good in this world. In Jesus' name, amen.